Good day, everybody, and welcome back to Mortgage Talk with Mark, and I am your host, Mark Harrison, by the way, where every week the idea is to help you make informed decisions around real estate, buying real estate, refinancing properties, building homes, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been doing this show a little over 2 years now. So today I thought I want to go back to some of the basics around buying property because we're in a market now in this fall of 2025 where I think there's some really good opportunities to be purchasing. And so a lot of the conversations I'm having right now are especially with some of the younger folks. And the question is, what are the benefits of maybe owning a home versus just renting? There's lots of people out there renting properties, which is fine, or apartments or condos or duplexes or whatnot. But I want to share some ideas around both the benefits of owning homes and also the cons of owning homes, some of the downside of owning property too. So help you if you're in that mindset to be thinking about this. My youngest son will be 33 this week, matter of fact, and he still rents. He's very qualified, and we have these conversations even at the house. So or between he and I. So I want to kind of talk about some of the foundations of what I think, at least my belief around owning property, because I own several homes. I've always owned homes for 35 years, and this is part of what I do. So the first, I think, benefit is you can build what we call equity. Equity is a position where you borrow money, and after time, over time, you pay it down, or sometimes just pay it off. So that's what's building equity by paying down your mortgage loan. The other part of that is predictability of housing costs. Right now we're doing almost exclusively fixed rate loans. So rates are running about 6% on the long-term 30-year loans, around 6 to 6 and a quarter. So those are fixed rates. So that payment will never change. Now you may have some change in your insurance cost and property taxes, of course. So it can change. Your payment can change over time, but you never know what's going to happen in rent. I'm doing a loan now for a couple who've been in their home for 10 years, renting a property for 10 years, and their rent's been going up every year. So they've decided to pull the trigger and buy a home, and the payment's going to be about the same, maybe a little more than they're paying currently, but they're going to own their own place. So the other thing about building equity, if you're an investor, by having property, somebody else is paying your mortgage for you. So I've got two rental properties in town, one in the Lost Creek area and one in Lakeway. And every month I look at my statements and somebody's making my mortgage payments for me. And not only the mortgage payments, but there's some cash flow as well. There's some extra cash there that we can use to improve the properties as people move out, because there's always maintenance. And that's going to be one of the things on the downside is the cost of owning real estate. But the benefit of owning real estate, if you own investment properties, somebody else is making those mortgage payments. And building equity right now is around $3,000 a month that somebody else is paying down my mortgages for me. So that's a beautiful thing. I like to look at those statements every every month. It makes me happy. Also, there are some tax deductions owning real estate that you're not going to have as a tenant. And a renter, you're always paying in but never get anything back. Well, one of the benefits, of owning real estate, either a homestead or certainly in investment properties, is some advantages of taxes, because you can write off your interest on both properties. And also, if you own an investment property, you can depreciate those properties, which will decrease the amount of taxes you have to pay if you have a gain on on the income. So every year, my wife and I file a Schedule F, or Schedule E, I think it is actually. And we report how much income we've made. We report lots of things about the property, but one of them is we report deductions. We can deduct certain things off that income, so we don't pay taxes on all that we bring in, which is a nice thing. And I'm not a CPA, so I'm not qualified to tell you exactly how that works. I just know that over time we've saved a lot of money by owning rental properties, for sure, as far as deducting certain things, and depreciation is one of those. And then we have the idea of what we call appreciation. Now, we haven't seen any appreciation in the last couple of years in Austin, to be honest. So appreciation historically in Austin, Texas, and I've been doing this 40 years. So 40 years of sort of tracking this data, we're looking at about a 4% to 5% annualized year after year appreciation over time. Now, the last couple of years have been tough ever since COVID was over, and in 2022, about 3 years ago, as rates have gone higher over the last 3 years, and they're starting to come down now. But we haven't seen any appreciation. We've seen some depreciation even in property values. So that could be a downside as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. But generally speaking, properties appreciate. My first home I bought in 1990. It was a 2,400 square foot property in the Oak Hill area off of William Cannon. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bath. Your usual thing on a nice cul-de-sac lot. $90,000. That property today, I don't own it anymore. Unfortunately, we sold it, but it would be worth around $600,000. That's called appreciation. So over time, if I would have stayed in that property, that house would be free and clear, and I would have a nice asset. You can't do that renting. I've also been a tenant over the years. I've rented myself. I've rented apartments in college and other times in my life, and so I understand how that works. And it can be a little bit cheaper option for people. So that's something you got to consider too. The other part is customization. You can customize a property to your choice if you own it. Now, if you're in an HOA, they may have a say about that. On a property in Lakeway, our HOA is pretty clear about certain things they'll allow and certain things they won't allow. But generally speaking, you have the option of customizing the property to your taste as far as colors and any updates you want to put in, things like that. And you can do that as a tenant, but the problem is you're fixing it up for somebody else. I've got a good friend of mine who's been leasing a property in Manor for about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. And he pays, I don't know, $2,500 a month in rent. He's a single guy. And he likes to landscape. He's really quite a talented landscaper. He doesn't do that for a living, but on the side he does. And I've seen his work. I'm like, Alonzo, this is really, really good stuff here, but the problem is he's fixing it up for somebody else. It's not his home. And I don't discount that for him, but because I encourage him to do what he chooses to, obviously. But at the end of the day, when he moves, the owner gets the benefit of any work that you've done, whether it be paint or in his case, landscaping. So that's something to consider as well. And also, what I call buying a property, and I think about this myself, it's considered a forced savings. It's kind of like if you were to take money out of your paycheck every month to put into 401k. Mortgages are kind of like that. It's a forced savings because over time, mortgage. So you're saving money in a way long term. So there's two elements. There's the equity buy down and there's the appreciation. So hopefully in a good market, which I think we're right now in a very stable market, and one I think we'll see some appreciation starting back this year. We have lots of properties on the market, as you may or may not know, listings in the Central Texas area. So you have a lot to choose from, and you can become very negotiable. I have a client who just contracted on a house in the Leisurewood areas down in the Buda market, older home, and negotiated a brand new roof and a whole electrical panel being replaced because it's an older home. They came in after inspection, and the seller has been there for years, like 20 years, and they weren't aware of the condition per se. They just hadn't kept it up, maintained it like they probably should have. And they're going to be spending probably $30,000 to $40,000 for my client's benefit, plus $15,000 to buy down his rate. So it's a very attractive situation now. We're in what I would call a buyer's market, a market where properties are on the market longer and buyers have more choices and more flexibility and more negotiation power. So again, I think it's a very good time to be looking to buy. And that speaks to the idea of what we call leverage. I did a loan a few months ago for a young couple that bought down in the Shady Hollow area, and they paid $500,000 for this home, but they only put down 3%. They only put down $15,000, and the seller paid all the additional cost to close. So for $15,000, they are controlling a $500,000 asset. You can't do that with any other investments. You can't do that with stocks or you can't do that with Bitcoin or whatnot. You have to buy what you buy. In real estate, it's different. It's called leverage. So, and their intention is to, in about a year or two, they're going to start a family, and their intention, at least in conversation, was in a year or two turn that property into a rental. So again, that's another form of leverage where they can rent that property out and at least make have the tenant make the payments for them, and they can go in to buy something else as the owner occupied. So that's called leverage. How to leverage real estate. It's a highly leverageable thing. Sometimes that works against people too. So you got to be careful. There's no set formulas in real estate buying residential real estate or commercial for that matter. So it does. There is a risk always in any investment, but typically speaking, real estate, in my experience in Austin, Texas, has been a very good investment. Probably 90% of my net worth is in my real estate. Because over time it's gone up and we've paid down the mortgages. So it's been a win-win, at least for my wife and I. And then there's this idea of what we call legacy or generational wealth. The idea is that the beauty of real estate, and I can't speak for other investments, it may be the same, but I know it is for homes. But if I were to pass away, my wife and I and our children were to receive that in inheritance, the cost basis for the property, it would be the new cost basis of where it is the day we pass, not what we paid for it. So in other words, let's say we paid $200,000 for one of our condos, and when we pass away, it's worth $400,000. If they were to sell that property, they wouldn't necessarily owe any taxes on it because the cost basis is what it's valued at today, not the 200 that we paid. There's no capital gains. So that's also another idea of how to legacy and generational wealth. That's another benefit of owning residential properties. The other benefit, we've talked about this in the past on some of the shows, is what they call a 1031 exchange, to where if you can defer taxes on investment properties, if you can take that equity, let's say it's $300,000, and I can reinvest that money into another property and not pay any taxes. If I were to have that home when I paid, then my kids would never pay tax on it, on the gains. So those are huge considerations when it comes to owning real estate. And you may want to get some tax advice around that. Again, I'm not a CPA. I just know some of the basic information around that. And the other part about it as an asset, as far as a homestead exemption, not an exemption so much, but a homestead, you can defer currently, and I think this law is going to change even for the better, but you can defer currently or not pay any taxes, not defer, but not pay any taxes up to $500,000 if you were to sell. So one of our homes, and we have $500,000 in it, and we live there, and we were to sell it, not sell it to reinvest, but just sell it to take the cash, up to $500,000, there is no income tax, there is no capital gains tax at all. Now, over that, you do have to pay capital gains. But up to $500,000 for a married couple, there is none. And that's been around for a long time. And I think, I could be wrong, but I feel that Trump may say that we're going to eliminate all capital gains on homestead properties. That hadn't happened yet, but that's in the conversation. So let's talk a little bit about the cons or the downsides of being a homeowner. And I've experienced this myself, so I try to speak from personal experience. Obviously there's upfront costs. When you rent a property, let's say you go rent an apartment somewhere and it's $2,000 a month, and you rent a house for $3,000. There's usually a first month deposit and the last month deposit. So let's say it's $3,000 a month. So that would be $6,000 you'd have to come up with. But of course three of that's going to be money that you either get back as a deposit, maybe down the road. But it's somewhat limited as far as out of pocket. Now, when you buy a property, typically you're going to put down at least 3%, unless you're a veteran. If you're a veteran, you can get in for zero. So the VA loans are exceptional products for veterans. Okay, well that's a subject for another day. But let's say you take 3% to get in, and then generally there's three buckets of monies required. There's your down payment, there's your third party hard costs for what they call closing costs. Then there's some expenses for insurance and taxes up front, what we call the prepaid item, where you prepay a certain amount of insurance and tax up front. Now, generally what we're seeing right now in this market is the benefit of sellers are very aggressive and very negotiable. So a lot of times sellers are paying for all the additional, they can't pay for your down payment, but they can pay for all the ancillary cost of buying a property. But there are going to be fees up front. Then you're going to have inspection fees. Okay, that could be $400 to inspect the property. There could be, if a property is in not real good shape, you may want to have to hire an engineer to come look at it to see, but if the slab's in good shape or the structure's in good shape. That doesn't happen often, but it could. Then there's ongoing expenses, and this is where I like to tell some of the younger folks this is not just like renting. You're going to have expenses as a homeowner, which is generally property taxes and insurance. Now, a lot of times, if those are escrowed in your payment, then that's handled already. That's the other part of this forced savings. Where two of my properties I don't escrow, so I have to write checks at the end of the year for my taxes. I have to be prepared to write a fairly large check every December for property taxes on two of the properties. And if I'm not ready for that, that's going to be a problem. Okay. Um, the other thing is 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 the responsibilities of maintenance. Now, when you rent an apartment or a home, we have tenants in our properties. One of them doesn't ever complain. He never hear from him except when he sends us money. The other one, they complain quite often about little things that maybe need fixing, and sometimes they're not little; they need to be fixed. If it's a water heater goes out, we have to fix that. If it's a dishwasher that goes out, we have to get that repaired. So when you're a tenant, they don't have to repair it. I have to. We have to hire somebody to repair those things. I'm not a maintenance guy, so we have that. There's expenses around that. The ACs, if you have an AC that's 15 years old or 20 years old, it may be on its last leg. Those things are expensive. So there's a lot of maintenance to properties that people just aren't ready for. So that's when I talk to people and counsel younger folks, especially around buying, I want to make sure they understand that it's not just like you're renting an apartment. You can call the landlord and say, hey, come fix this water heater. That's not how it works. So and it gets expensive. Now, there are ideas around warranties. And I've had some guests on here before that do home warranty work, where there's companies out there that they'll insure the basic maintenance of a property. They won't insure the roof. Now, that's for home insurance itself, but home warranty companies we've had refrigerators replaced. We've had ACs replaced. We've had a lot of work done on our properties with warranties. That's another expense, though, you got to keep in mind. It's buying insurance, just like it is buying car insurance. And also liquidity. Liquidity is a problem. Real estate is not like a stock where you just call your stockbroker and liquidate it, or a CD or something like that. It could take time and expensive to liquidate real estate. It's usually, I estimate on average 8 to 10% of the value of your property to sell it. So if you have a home worth about $500,000, it may be $40,000 to $50,000 in order for you to liquidate or sell that property, with realtor fees and concessions to the buyers and ancillary fees that may come up as far as closing costs for the seller. So that's another thing you have to keep in mind. And if you haven't been in a property for a while, you may not have that equity position yet unless you put a bunch of money down. But if you put the minimum down and you have to move, it could be a problem. So liquidity is a consideration. I'm not sure it's a downside, but it's not a benefit for sure. And market risk. Let's face it. The market if you bought a property in 2022, like I did, be honest with you, it's not worth what I have in it. Now, I have equity in it because we have a lot of money into it. We put a lot of money into it. But if we were to sell currently, my wife and I, we wouldn't get all that money back because it's a long story, but just take my word for it. There's some market risk in real estate. And they say, I think on average across the board in the last 3 years, the market, generally speaking, is down around 20%, which is a pretty big hit. But you got to realize we had a run up about 60% up until 2022. So it ebbs and flows. It's like the stock market, but even if it ebbs and flows, the trend is always, at least in Texas, in Austin, Texas, has been higher. And again, there's less flexibility to sell a house. Some of these people if you put a house in the market, unless you price it right and it's good condition, you could be sitting on that thing for 6 months. So there's lots of handling costs too. If your job is transferred and you leave and your house is vacant, it's 4 or 5 months that you're not living there. You're paying expenses somewhere else to live. If you had a job transfer, unless your company pays for it, you're going to be sitting on paying your taxes, all the maintenance of the property, taxes, insurance, yard work, utilities, et cetera, et cetera. So there's less flexibility if you have to move. You have to move, and you're a renter, you just pick up and move. There's no problem unless you're under a lease and you may have some obligations to finish the lease. Speaking, it's much easier to leave a rental property than a property that you own. And transaction costs. We talked about this a little bit, about either buying or selling. There's going to be transaction costs. There's a lot of third parties that get involved in these transactions. There's a lot of people, and that's why housing is such an important part of our economy. The government wants people to buy property because it's good for them, and it's good the overall economy itself. I think it's around 15% of our GDP is in real estate transactions because of all the people involved, whether it be construction people or realtors or myself or title companies. There's a lot of money flowing through this industry. So let's talk a little bit about if you were to buy a property or you're thinking about buying a property. The first step, in my opinion, is to get pre-approved. And we've talked about this before. This is something we drill a lot into people because it's the most important step you can come up with, mainly because, number one, you want to make sure you can get a loan. There's no reason to go shop online or go to open houses or hire a realtor, unless you know what you can afford and if you're credit approved and how much you can afford. And not so much as far as how much you can borrow, but what is your budget? I have this conversation almost daily with people because let's say they qualify for a $4,000 monthly payment, and that's the kind of property they want to purchase, but their personal budget's $3,000 a month. Okay, so then they have to come back off what they want to buy because of of their monthly budget they want to stay with. That's very, very important. So you want to make sure you establish that number first, and then to hire a qualified realtor. I know hundreds of good realtors because I've worked with hundreds of them over the years. But find somebody that's been around the business and knows the market that you want to be in. You don't want to move to Georgetown and hire somebody who works San Marcos, okay? Because they don't know that Georgetown market like somebody who either lives in the area or who's sold property there for a long time. So find somebody with some good market expertise, and also somebody who understands negotiation. Don't just have somebody sell you a home. You want to negotiate. And, I have a property client right now who purchased a property or contracted on a property for $540,000. After the inspections came back that they did last week, it turns out the roof is in bad shape and the electrical panel and the electrical system for the house really needs to be replaced. So the seller's been there over 20 years. The property's 40 years old. And they haven't really seen a problem around that. But the fact of the matter is, the seller is not only discounting the price from 540 to 515, paying $15,000 in buyer discount points to buy down the rate, plus they're replacing the roof, plus the electrical panel. So they're going to be out of pocket about $50,000 at the end of the day. So now that may be exceptions to the rule because this property did need some work. It's a beautiful home. I've seen the home, but internally there's a lot going on that they just weren't aware of. They didn't know their roof was shot, but the insurance is going to be hard to get if your roof's in bad shape. So that would be a time where you can really negotiate a good deal, and you want to find a realtor who has good experience, that understands how all that works, and also managing the paperwork. I get a lot of questions. Do I have to have a real buy or sell? But I can't have any reason. I can't imagine any reason why you wouldn't want to have a professional helping you in these transactions. There's a lot of money involved, and also there's a lot of paperwork involved. If you don't understand how contracts work, then that's a problem because you could find yourself in trouble if you don't understand contracts. In a real estate contract these days is about 10 pages long, so it's not a one-page deal. There's lots of moving pieces to these real estate contracts. You want to find somebody who really understands how that works, and also what we call a professional network. And this is including myself as well. I have a large network of vendors, what I call vendors, of contacts that we can, refer you to if you need help with roof, as an example, or you need help with flooring, or you need help with painting, any kind of general contracting work or subcontracting work. A good realtor is going to have a network, the trusted network of people who they've worked with, could be flooring people or whatnot, AC people, that they can refer you to. Same with me. I've got a lot of contacts simply because we own property. We've hired a lot of people over the years because I am not a handy guy. I'll be honest. I don't do handy work. I don't do any work around that. So we have to hire that stuff out. So we know some really good people. And and also understanding a little bit about financing. They can kind of lead you to a good lender like myself. A good realtor is going to have good contacts in both the title work and in mortgages. So those are things to consider as well. And then, so just briefly, I'm going to kind of run through a few steps. Well, we're kind of at the end of the show today, but again, we want to talk about if you're looking to buy, get pre-approved first. Interview some top-notch realtors to help you in your pursuit. Start online, but find somebody who's going to help you walk through the process to buy a property. You want to start looking around, have considerations around what's important to you as a family, around school districts or near shopping or near employment or near major intersections or roads that you want to be around. And then get a good mortgage company and get through all the inspection process and the process itself, and then close on that house. And so that's kind of how that works. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at 512-789-6967. Or my email is mark@markhairston.com, and my last name is spelled Hairston, mark@markhairston.com. And I would love